My son humiliated me at his own birthday party. With a smirk, Andrew raised his glass and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're just ordinary. You clean houses. Vanessa's family owns a vacation home in Malibu." Laughter rippled through the crowd as I stood there clutching the small box in my hands, a gift that suddenly felt worthless. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply smiled, turned away, and walked out. But silence has a way of echoing louder than words. An hour later, my phone lit up with 27 desperate calls. Something had shifted. My name is Helen Carter, and at 67, my days had settled into a rhythm so predictable, it was almost comforting. I woke with the first hint of dawn, the creak of the wooden floorboards greeting me like an old companion. My little house, tucked at the end of a quiet street in a modest neighborhood, smelled faintly of lavender and lemon polish, scents I'd carried with me from decades of cleaning other people's homes. In the mornings, I would slip into my worn gardening gloves and tend to the small patch of flowers in my yard. Roses and tulips mostly, blooms I coaxed into life the same way I once coaxed a stubborn little boy into eating his vegetables. That boy was Andrew, my only son, now 36. When I looked at him, I still saw the wide-eyed child who clung to my leg on his first day of school, terrified of being left behind. But time has a cruel way of sanding down soft edges. The boy, who once depended on me for everything, had grown into a man desperate to prove he needed nothing from anyone. He had a job in corporate finance, not quite the corner office, but enough to make him believe he was destined for more. And perhaps he was. But in his pursuit of success, he began to see me less as his anchor and more as a shadow from a past he wanted to escape. Andrew's wife, Vanessa, seemed to encourage this unspoken distance. She was beautiful, polished, and from the kind of family that wore wealth as naturally as perfume. At first, I thought she might welcome me, even respect the sacrifices I had made for Andrew. But Vanessa had a gift for cloaking condescension in sweetness. She would smile warmly, compliment my cooking, and then casually mention how different it was from the meals she grew up with. She praised my patience with Lily, my granddaughter, then remarked how old-fashioned my methods seemed. Every word carried an edge I wasn't supposed to notice. Lily was the light of my life. At 8 years old, she was a whirlwind of questions, laughter, and messy art projects. When she ran into my arms, the rest of the world seemed to blur. With her, I felt seen, cherished, as if my role in the family still mattered. Yet even that bond was carefully monitored. Vanessa would remind me not to let Lily eat too many cookies or that bedtime had to be exact. Subtle reminders that, while I was welcome to help, I was no longer in charge of anything. I told myself it didn't matter. I was used to being overlooked, used to surviving on scraps of recognition. For most of my life, I had worked quietly, cleaning strangers' homes while raising Andrew alone after his father passed. The money was never enough, but I made do. I sacrificed new clothes, vacations, and rest so that Andrew could have what he needed. I wore shoes until the soles gave out. I ironed shirts late into the night so he would never feel ashamed at school. Every choice I made was to push him forward, to give him a chance at a life beyond the one I had. And in some ways, I succeeded. He lived in a house far larger than mine, drove a car I could never afford, and hosted parties with people who never knew the taste of fear when rent was due. Still, whenever I visited, I felt a tightening in my chest. Vanessa would usher me into the guest room. Not your room, Mom, but the guest room. Subtle, but cutting. Andrew rarely called except when he needed me to babysit Lily. Conversations grew shorter, clipped. When I tried to share old stories, he would glance at his phone, or Vanessa would steer the topic elsewhere. I started to feel it. The unmistakable shift. The place I once held as the foundation of Andrew's life was slipping away. I was not his mother in those moments, not even family. I was an obligation, a house guest tolerated because blood ties made it unavoidable. And yet, I stayed quiet. I told myself it was pride. that if I made myself small enough, easy enough, they would remember who I was to them. One evening, during dinner at their house, I tried to tell Lily a story about Andrew as a boy, how he once tried to rescue a stray kitten by hiding it in his backpack. Lily's eyes lit up, eager to hear, but Vanessa interrupted, laughing politely as she redirected Lily to talk about her piano lessons instead. Andrew didn't stop her. He didn't even look at me. The story died on my tongue. I walked home that night under a sky full of stars, but I felt smaller than I ever had. It wasn't just the comments, the looks, or the silences. It was the creeping realization that somewhere along the way, I had been quietly moved from the center of Andrew's life to the margins. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was how it would always be. Me on the outside, watching through the glass as they lived a life I had helped build yet no longer belonged to. I tried to dismiss it, to believe I was imagining things. Mothers, after all, can be too sensitive, too protective. But deep down I knew. The intuition I had carried since Andrew's childhood whispered a warning. Something was unraveling. I thought it was just a feeling, one I could ignore. I didn't know that only days later, Andrew would prove it true, with words so sharp they would cut deeper than any silence ever could. Andrew's 36th birthday arrived with the kind of spectacle that seemed designed less to celebrate life and more to showcase it. Vanessa had spared no expense. Caterers in crisp black uniforms glided through the grand living room of their home, offering trays of champagne and miniature hors d'oeuvres. Strings of lights shimmered along the vaulted ceiling, and laughter echoed against polished marble floors. I walked in quietly, holding a small velvet box in my hand, my palms damp from nerves. Inside the box was my gift, the simple gold wedding band that once belonged to Andrew's father. It was scratched, worn, and certainly not glamorous, but it carried the weight of history. I thought perhaps Andrew might wear it as a token, a reminder that before the parties and the money, there had been love and sacrifice. When I arrived, Vanessa greeted me with a flawless smile, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Helen, you made it," she said brightly, kissing the air near my cheek. "Andrew will be so happy." But her eyes flicked briefly to the box in my hand, a flash of something unreadable passing through them before she turned away to greet other guests. I found a seat near the back, content to watch. Andrew, standing in the center of the crowd, looked every bit the part of the successful man, his suit tailored, his hair perfectly styled. Guests toasted him, clinking glasses, speaking of his ambition and bright future. Pride should have swelled in my chest, but instead I felt small, as though I were intruding. When the time came for presents, I stepped forward. My fingers trembled as I opened the velvet box, revealing the ring. "This was your father's," I said softly. "I thought it should belong to you now." For a fleeting moment, silence fell, and Andrew looked at the ring with something unreadable in his eyes. Then, with a chuckle that felt too sharp, he turned to his friends. "You're just ordinary, Mom. You clean houses. Vanessa's family owns a vacation home in Malibu." The words sliced through me before I could even breathe. Laughter rippled across the room, uneasy, forced, but laughter nonetheless. My cheeks burned. I felt every pair of eyes flick toward me, waiting for a reaction. I managed to smile, though it trembled at the corners. Carefully, I closed the box and slid it back into my purse. No one stopped me as I bent to gather my coat. No one asked me to stay. Andrew was already turning toward another friend, glass raised high as if nothing had been said. The world blurred around me as I walked out the door, the sound of laughter trailing behind me like shards of broken glass. The cool night air hit my face, sharp and bracing, but it wasn't enough to steady the storm inside my chest. On the drive home, the scene replayed endlessly in my mind. His smirk, the tilt of his head, the dismissive tone. Ordinary. That was what I had become in his eyes. Just ordinary. Not the woman who had skipped meals so he could eat. Not the mother who had scrubbed floors until her hands cracked and bled so he could afford new shoes. Not the one who had stood by his hospital bed when he was sick as a child. Just ordinary. By the time I reached my house, my hands were shaking too badly to hold my keys steady. I leaned against the door, heart pounding, breath ragged. Tears spilled unchecked, soaking into the collar of my blouse. I pressed my palms against my face, wishing I could erase the words from existence. I sat down at my kitchen table, the velvet box still clutched in my hand. I opened it once more, staring at the ring that had symbolized everything. Love, struggle, endurance. My chest ached with the weight of memory. I could almost hear my husband's voice telling me to be strong. But strength felt far away in that moment. All I could feel was the sting of humiliation, the raw ache of betrayal by the very person I had lived for. The phone buzzed on the table, jolting me. One missed call, then another, then another. Within an hour, the screen glowed with 27 missed calls, all from Andrew. He'd never called me that many times in one night in his life. My heart lurched, confused. Why now? Why after those words, that humiliation? What had happened after I left? I didn't pick up. I couldn't. My throat was too tight, my chest too heavy. I sat in the dark, listening to the insistent buzzing echo through the room. I didn't know it yet, but my silence, my refusal to answer, wasn't weakness. It was the first step toward a reckoning that would shake everything Andrew thought he controlled. The morning after the party, I woke to the pale light filtering through my curtains, and the echo of Andrew's words still lodged in my chest. My phone lay on the kitchen table where I had left it, its screen glowing with unread messages. I hesitated before unlocking it, afraid of what I might find. The first message was from a woman I barely knew, one of Andrew's colleagues who had been at the party. Helen, I'm so sorry for what Andrew said last night. He shouldn't have spoken that way. If it weren't for you, he wouldn't even be where he is today. My throat tightened as I read it again. She had no idea how true her words were. The second message was a video file. I clicked play and froze. The video began with the moment I left, my figure slipping out of the door. For a moment, there was silence in the room. Then a man's voice broke through. Did you really have to say that, Andrew? That was your mother. Another voice followed, sharper this time. You wouldn't be here if she hadn't worked herself half to death for you. The camera, shaky and unsteady, caught Andrew's face as he tried to laugh it off, but the smile faltered. He shifted from foot to foot, glancing at Vanessa, who looked away uncomfortably. More voices rose, questioning him, shaming him, and for the first time I saw a flicker of unease on his face. I watched the clip twice, then a third time. Each word from those strangers, each rebuke, felt like a balm against the wound he had left on me. But it wasn't enough. Something inside me whispered that there was more to uncover, more to understand about why Andrew had been so cruel. I walked to the old wooden cabinet in the hallway, the one where I kept decades of papers, bills, and documents that had followed me through life. My hands trembled as I opened the drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Dust rose into the air, catching the morning light. I flipped through tax forms, hospital receipts, utility bills, until I found what I was looking for, the deed to the house. Andrew and Vanessa had been living in that house for years, calling it theirs, decorating it, entertaining in it as though it were a monument to their success. But the name on the deed was mine, Helen Carter. Not Andrew, not Vanessa, me. I sank into a chair, staring at the yellowed pages. All those nights I had scrubbed floors until my knuckles cracked. All the mornings I had risen before dawn to catch the bus across town. It was for this, a home, stability, something solid to pass to my son. And yet he had stood before a room of people and declared me ordinary, as if I were nothing. My chest ached, but beneath the ache, a spark ignited. If the house was still mine, what else remained that Andrew did not know? The thought propelled me forward the next morning. I put on my best coat, the one with the missing button at the cuff, and walked into the local bank where I had held an account for decades. The teller, a young woman who recognized me, directed me to a manager's office. I slid my identification across the desk. "I'd like to check on my savings account," I said. My voice felt strange, as though it belonged to someone else. The man typed quickly, then looked up. "Yes, Mrs. Carter. Your account is active. The balance is—" He turned the screen toward me, and my breath caught. 40 years of careful deposits, of money saved from cleaning jobs and babysitting and secondhand sales. The balance wasn't extravagant by most standards, but to me, it was monumental. It was survival made tangible. As I left the bank, I felt taller, steadier. The story Andrew told himself, that he had risen on his own, that he owed me nothing, was a lie. And I had proof. Still, questions gnawed at me. Why the sudden cruelty at the party? Why now? The answer came a few days later, whispered to me in the form of an overheard conversation. A neighbor who had attended the party told me she'd heard Vanessa speaking to a friend. They were discussing listings in Malibu, laughing about a future upgrade. "Once we sell the current place," Vanessa had said, "we'll have more than enough for a down payment." Sell the current place, my house, my sacrifice. The realization struck like a thunderclap. It wasn't just Andrew's words that night. It wasn't just thoughtless cruelty. It was calculation. He wasn't only dismissing me, he was trying to erase me, to strip away the last tangible proof of my life's work. I sat in my living room that night, the deed spread out before me, the bank statement beside it. My hands no longer trembled. My breath was steady. I understood now. My son hadn't just denied me. He hadn't just humiliated me. He wanted to take the very foundation of everything I had built, and I would not let him. The papers lay scattered across my table, yellowed by time but sharp in their reminder. One detail kept pulling me back: the medical bills. I remembered every sleepless night when Andrew was a boy, coughing so hard that his tiny chest rattled like it might break apart. He had nearly died from a severe infection. I had been working 3 houses a day back then, scraping together every dime. Looking at the receipts now, I realized those hospital stays had been paid almost entirely from the very savings account Andrew didn't even know existed. It was my labor, my hands raw from bleach, my knees sore from scrubbing floors, that had kept him alive. And now, the same man who once clutched my hand in that sterile hospital bed stood in a room full of people and called me ordinary. The irony was cruel, almost unbearable. As I pieced through the documents, another truth surfaced. A neighbor who had been at the party dropped by to check on me, sympathy written on her face. She leaned in and whispered, "I overheard Vanessa that night. She told a friend, 'The house will soon be ours anyway, it's just a matter of time.'" I sat frozen. The words echoed in my head. Soon be ours, not Andrew's, theirs. Vanessa spoke as though my home were already signed over, as if my years of sacrifice could be reduced to a simple transaction. That was the moment I understood with perfect clarity. Andrew's cruelty wasn't an accident of pride. It was greed. He had let himself be consumed by Vanessa's vision of wealth, by the hunger for status, by the insatiable need to appear successful. And in chasing that, he had allowed the ugliest parts of human nature, greed, envy, arrogance, to devour him whole. For the first time, I didn't just see my son as ungrateful. I saw him as dangerous to everything I had built. My chest tightened, but it wasn't fear. It was resolve. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the silence. I thought of Lily's small hands in mine, of her innocent smile when she called me Grandma. If I did nothing, what lesson would she inherit? That people could trample over those who gave them everything? That cruelty was rewarded and kindness forgotten? No, I would not allow that. The next morning, I dressed carefully, smoothing the wrinkles from my blouse. My steps felt steadier as I walked into the office of an attorney recommended by a friend. His shelves were lined with thick books, the air heavy with the scent of leather and paper. He listened quietly as I laid out my situation, sliding the deed and bank records across the desk. He looked at the documents, then at me. "Mrs. Carter, you have complete ownership of this property. Andrew has no legal claim to it. Whatever plans he and his wife might have, they're meaningless without your consent." I exhaled slowly, a weight lifting off my chest. For so long, I had felt powerless, diminished. Now, I held the truth in my hands. Not just truth, leverage. I didn't tell Andrew, I didn't confront Vanessa. Outwardly, I carried on as though nothing had changed. When Andrew called, I answered kindly. When Vanessa smiled with that practiced sweetness, I smiled back. But inside, I was different. Inside, I was already preparing. One evening, I sat at my desk with pen and paper, the faint light of a lamp casting long shadows. I began drafting a new will. My hand trembled at first, but the more I wrote, the steadier it became. I wasn't leaving the house to Andrew. No, he had already shown me what he would do with it. Sell it, squander it, erase every trace of what I had given. Instead, I wrote Lily's name. My sweet granddaughter, who still saw me not as a burden, not as an embarrassment, but as her safe place. I would leave it all to her. The house, the savings, every scrap of dignity I had managed to build from the ashes of a hard life. When the ink dried, I folded the papers neatly and placed them in an envelope. My heart beat with a strange mixture of sadness and strength. This wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. I sat back and whispered into the silence. If Andrew sees me as a burden, then he will never know what it feels like to inherit my life's work. But Lily will. For the first time in years, I felt calm. What Andrew and Vanessa didn't know was that the woman they dismissed as ordinary had already set the stage for the most extraordinary revelation of their lives. The cafe was bright, crowded with the hum of conversation and the hiss of steaming milk. Andrew had chosen the place, perhaps to give the illusion of control, perhaps to mask the tension between us with the distraction of clinking cups. I arrived a few minutes early, clutching a leather folder beneath my coat. When Andrew walked in, he looked polished as always, but his eyes darted around the room before landing on me. He didn't smile. We sat opposite each other at a small table near the window. Andrew wasted no time. "Mom," he began, his tone clipped, "Vanessa and I have been looking at properties in Malibu. We found a place. All we need is for you to sign over the house. It's just paperwork. You'll still live comfortably. We'll take care of everything." He slid a stack of documents across the table, his hands steady but his jaw tight. I looked down at the papers, then back at him. For a long moment, I said nothing. Silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. And Andrew shifted in his chair. "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be." I reached into my folder and pulled out the deed to the house. Placing it gently on the table, I pushed his papers aside. His eyes flickered in confusion. I added the bank statement next, then the old hospital receipts, edges yellow and brittle. Finally, I laid my hands flat on the table and looked him directly in the eye. "Do you remember these?" I asked softly. "This deed, my name, not yours. Do you see it?" He blinked, his confidence faltering. I continued, sliding the medical bill forward. This was the hospital that saved your life when you were 6. Paid in full from money I earned cleaning houses, every cent scraped together so you could breathe, so you could grow into the man sitting here now asking me to erase myself from everything I built. Andrew's face tightened, color rising in his cheeks. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His hand moved toward the paperwork he had brought, but he didn't touch it. His bravado was slipping, unraveling in the face of proof too solid to deny. I saved. I worked. I built that house. And I let you live there, Andrew. But don't confuse living there with owning it. The silence around our table grew thick, broken only by the low murmur of other customers, unaware of the war playing out inches away. Andrew's shoulders sagged as though the weight of the evidence pressed him into his chair. His lips parted, searching for words, but none came. I gathered the papers slowly, deliberately, as his eyes followed every movement. Then I leaned forward, my voice quiet but firm. I haven't said everything yet. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing, but I didn't flinch. I let the pause linger, heavy with the promise of something more, something he wasn't ready to hear. The air between us shifted. Andrew's anger bubbled to the surface. "So what? You're just going to hold this over me forever? You can't keep me out of what's mine." Vanessa arrived halfway through his outburst, her heels clicking across the tiled floor. She slid into the seat beside him, lips painted into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Helen," she purred, "we all want what's best for the family. Don't you want Andrew and Lily to have a better life? Malibu would be perfect for her. Think of it as your gift to the next generation." I looked at her, then at my son, who nodded eagerly as though her words could erase the reality in front of us. For a moment, sorrow threatened to wash over me, but then steadiness returned. I reached once more into my folder and pulled out the envelope containing my new will. I placed it on the table, sliding it toward them. "This," I said, "is the future of the house. Not yours, Andrew, not Vanessa's, Lily's." Andrew's mouth fell open. Vanessa's hand froze mid-gesture. The silence that followed was deafening. "I left it to her," I continued. "The house, the savings, everything I earned. Because she's the only one who still looks at me and sees family, not a burden to be erased." Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the tile. Without a word, she turned and walked out, her heels striking like gunshots. Andrew remained seated, staring at the envelope as though it were a live wire. His lips trembled, his eyes glassy. "Mom, you can't—" But the fight was gone from his voice. His certainty had crumbled, leaving only a hollow man confronted with the truth of what he had become. I gathered my things calmly, slipping the folder back under my arm. Standing, I looked down at him, not with anger, but with something colder, disappointment. "You lived in my house as though it were yours, but living there was a privilege, not a right. And a privilege must be cherished, Andrew, not taken for granted." I left him there, hunched and broken in a crowded cafe, the papers lying between us like a wall he would never climb. As I stepped out into the afternoon light, the weight I had carried for years lifted from my shoulders. I knew then that whatever came next, nothing would ever return to the way it had been. Months passed quietly after that day in the cafe. The tension that once weighed heavily on my chest had loosened, replaced by a strange calm. I sold the house, my house, and chose a small apartment near the coast. It was modest, but it overlooked the ocean. Each morning I could step onto my balcony and hear the waves rolling in, steady and timeless, as if they were reminding me that life always moved forward. The apartment was enough for me. I filled it with the essentials: a comfortable chair by the window, shelves of books I'd collected over the years, and a simple desk where I began writing. At first, I wrote only for myself. Memories of my childhood, stories of Andrew as a boy, the small victories and the countless sacrifices I had carried alone. But as the pages filled, I realized I was writing for Lily, too. Someday she would read these words and know the truth, not just of what happened, but of who I was. Andrew's visits became infrequent. I heard through neighbors and old acquaintances that his finances were strained. Without Vanessa's family money and without the house as collateral, he had to face the world without shortcuts. I didn't rejoice in his struggles, but I also didn't rescue him. Some lessons I had learned must be lived, not told. Lily, however, came often. Her little feet would patter across my floor, her laughter filling the apartment like sunlight. She would sit by my side as I wrote, asking me to tell her stories about when Daddy was small. I told her gently, leaving out the shadows, focusing on the moments of tenderness. She deserved to know her father as the boy who once chased fireflies and hugged me tight, not only as the man who faltered. In those moments, I found peace. My role had changed, yes, but it had not disappeared. I was not erased. I was simply transformed. One evening, as the sky turned pink over the ocean, Lily sat at the table with crayons scattered everywhere. She worked in silence, her little brow furrowed with concentration. When she finally looked up, her eyes shone. "Grandma, this is for you." She handed me a sheet of paper covered in bright colors. In the center was a drawing of a small house with flowers in front, and next to it, a figure with gray hair and a smile. Across the top, in uneven letters, she had written, "Grandma, you're my home." My throat tightened and tears blurred the page. In that moment, every sacrifice, every humiliation, every silence I had endured found its meaning. I had not been erased. My worth had not vanished into Andrew's careless words or Vanessa's ambition. It lived here, in the love of a child who saw me not as ordinary, but as everything. I hugged Lily close, unable to speak. She leaned against me, unbothered by my tears, her little hand resting on mine. "Don't cry, Grandma," she whispered. "I'll always be with you." I closed my eyes, letting the waves crash outside, letting her words settle deep in my soul. For the first time in years, I felt seen, truly seen. To anyone watching from the outside, my story might seem simple. An old woman who lost her son's respect, who chose silence over confrontation, who walked away. But silence is not surrender. Silence can be a weapon sharper than words, a reminder that truth does not need shouting to be heard. I think now of those watching, perhaps mothers like me, perhaps children who forget the hands that raised them. And I leave them with this: never underestimate the weight of what has been given to you. Do not dismiss it as ordinary, because behind every ordinary life is 1,000 sacrifices unseen. So I ask you, if you were in my place, would you forgive? Would you open your arms again? Or would you let silence carry the truth forward, louder than any apology ever could? The ocean roared in answer, endless and unbroken. And in that sound, I found my peace.